In the previous videos, we mentioned about presenting results in your thesis or journals. It was mentioned that you need to find an effective way to present the results, providing all the necessary information to the readers, which at the same time you will need to guide the thinkings of the readers as well as their attentions towards the directions you intend them to be. This is so that the reader can easily comprehend the message and the purpose behind presenting those results without wandering off, paying attention towards something which is insignificant. We also mentioned a bit regarding the tables and figures. We know that the tables or figures are meant to complement the text within the thesis. All the tables and figures needs to be referred somewhere in the text in your thesis, and normally those tables and figures need to be presented immediately after the paragraph that it is mentioned. We also mentioned that you cannot just simply mention the existence of the tables and figures due to their natures of presenting high concentrations of the informations unless you draw the attention towards some focus or highlighting some findings. Those informations is not actually meaningful to the readers. It will be as if a bunch of data or a bunch of numbers to the readers without knowing what is the purpose and the message behind. Now let us discuss more in terms of the modes of data presentations, which you have text, table, graph, and illustrations. There is a relative comparison in terms of their effectiveness in presenting the content, precisions, impact, and interest. The content means that the meaningful explanations to the readers as well as the exact informations given to the readers. We are referring to the quality of the content as well as the amount of content that can be presented to the reader. Then we are looking at the precisions, whichever results or value presented, whether these tools are able to give an exact value in terms of the accuracy. And then we are talking about the impacts. What is the perceptions of the readers upon encountering these modes of data presentations, as well as the interest that you can draw from the readers. The star here represents the relative comparisons among different methods of presentations. If you want to present your result, which is more content-based, you may want to consider using the text and table. If you are looking for precisions in terms of the numbers presented, the text and table, it will be more appropriate. If you are talking about the impact and interest, whether you're going to draw better attentions from the readers, as well as how much the readers can recall after reading your thesis, as represented by the interest and impact respectively, then you might want to consider the graph and illustrations. The illustrations can be in the modes of photo, or figures, or flowchart, or schematic diagram, or anything that can be presented in the graphical manner. These are categorized under the illustrations. As for the graph, there is an advantage of presenting the graph. First is the interrelationship between the data. Second, it will be a tool for you to do some projections, which you can observe the trend presented in the graph and probably you can make some logical projections as an extension for the trend as observed from the graph. The advantage of the table, it will be presenting informations in parallel, which is some forms of the matrix of at least two-dimensional, showing the relationship between those dimensions. And then the text has an advantage to guide the understanding and help the readers to comprehend the message behind the informations. The table here shows a comparisons of the applications of the tables and figures. When you are working with the numbers, most likely you would like to present them in table. Or when you are actually working with the shapes, then figure it will be more useful. Or if you are concentrating on the individual data value, table will be a useful tool. Or if you want to observe the overall pattern, a figure it will be quite useful. The figure here can be in the mode of the graph as well as in the mode of the illustrations. You know that when you want to present the data or result in tables, normally the precise value is important to you. The precise value is not as important when it is presented in the figure. As the focus of the informations, it will be more towards the patterns or the interrelationships as implied within the figures. Most likely you're going to observe some relative comparisons, and most likely you're going to encounter figures which are constructed without complying with the scale or the aspect ratio. Now let us proceed with some common mistakes when using the figures and tables. These are the common mistakes with figures, where you use wrong figure type, where you wrongly placing emphasis or missing the important storyline. Sometimes you have weak descriptive titles, or you have repeating data in the text or tables. This is something related with the redundancy or repetitions, which is not necessary in geodesics. Sometimes you may choose to incorporate the numbers when the exact value are not actually important. I guess when you want to construct figures here, you can always check yourself with these common mistakes. These are the common mistakes that we observe from our students, which down to the root cause is that most of the students do not have a clear purpose while constructing the figures. It is as if they are autopilot when come to presenting the results, simply choose to present it in figures based on their basic understanding, where the nature of information is quite difficult to be presented in table, and then they construct the figures for the sake of presenting to the readers. You should always have the purpose behind everything, as it will decide what type of figures that you're going to use. Having the clear purpose, you are able to decide which informations to be incorporated and what kind of informations are not to be incorporated. You should know the advantage of the figures. You are trying to use the most out of its advantage and not to use its weakness to achieve some purpose of presentations. Next, we come to the common mistakes of the tables. Again, there is a weak descriptive titles for the tables, inclusions of unnecessary or redundant data, inclusions of non-significant or over-precise numbers. In fact, this quite common happen among our students. which I also made some of this mistake quite some time ago until I submitted for the journals, being commented by the reviewer that it is not necessary for me to present a number with so many significant figures. Then I realized that it is actually not necessary for us to provide numbers in the over-precise manner. For an example, you are talking about a numbers in 3 significant figures. 3 significant figures means that the precision is already 1 out of 1000, which is precise enough in most of the case. Imagine now you're looking for 4 significant figures. Your smallest interval, which is your accuracy, it will be 1 out of 10,000. Imagine how small is the number relative to the numbers as an overall. Therefore, it is not necessary for you to go beyond 3 significant figures. Another example is the units of your measurements. If you are measuring something in kilogram, or you are looking for the weight in terms of the kilonewton, then you may use 3 significant figures where the smallest interval it will be 1 gram or 1 newton, which is rather small in our daily life. Let's say now your measurements is in terms of the gram and newton. You will need to decide that whether it is necessary for you to have 3 significant figures for your measurements. You know that 1 gram and 1 newton can easily affected by slight vibrations or wind blow. Again, you will have to come back to the purpose of your study as well as the scale of your measurements. You know that 3 significant figures for a gram, it will be equivalent to 1 milligram. Unless you are doing some measurements in terms of the concentrations of certain compound, let's say for an example, the concentrations for a drug, which is medicine, then they are quantifying units, it will be by milligram, and then you have to define the amount of significant figures that you need to present the results. Next common mistake with the tables are omissions of data necessary for the reader to make important calculations for experimental data. This also quite commonly happen. You know that the entire rationale of producing thesis is for you to provide sufficient details, every single one of them, to make possible for the readers to replicate the studies. Same principle apply when you have acquired the data, which is required for the calculations for you to compute results. Then you should incorporate sufficient information for the reader. If possible, you will need to demonstrate your calculation process to the reader to make possible for the readers to recalculate or recompute those informations. This is very important, which normally occur among our postgraduate students, thinking that they only need to present the final result, while the rest of the informations is just given by very brief explanations or sometimes without any explanations. And the next common mistake it will be the tables are not arranged to highlight the most significant results. This is another level of thinking which is not aware by most of the students. They present the data in table for the sake of presenting the informations, which in fact you can present the data in the tables covering all the necessary informations, which at the same time you go one step further, giving highlight to some significant results by carefully choose where the data are placed in your table. Most of the students are not aware that different positions of the tables carry different functions in terms of the significance. A simple rule of thumb is that you are looking at the first row or the last row of the table. Normally, these are the common places where we can emphasize our results. Or you are looking at the first column as well as the last column of the table. As for the tables other than the first and the last row and the first and the last column, normally the readers would just quickly have a look, unless being highlighted within the text, guiding them to come back to the tables, seeking for respective answers. If not, it is most likely going to be ignored by the readers. This is something that you can think of when you want to present your table. What we have discussed so far, you know that there are many ways for you to present the results. You will need to choose the right one to effectively present your results. And then you should try your best to minimize the overlapping and the redundancy in presenting the result by different tools. If certain result has already been presented in table, it will be depending on the purpose of the presentations or the focus of the discussions, which without any clear purpose, you do not need to repeat the presentations in another form of presentations such as figures. Everything will have to draw down to the purpose of the presentations and the focus of the discussions.